nonstick DuPonts ever made.
Hi, I'm Richard Sax. Welcome to my video cookbook that'll let you give great dinner parties without any anxiety. Because if you're like a lot of people I know, you love to welcome people into your home, but the thought of a dinner party throws you right into a panic. Well, I'm going to share some secrets and tips with you, and once you get the knack of it, and it really means preparing as much as you can in advance, then you're going to enjoy your dinner parties just as much as your guests will. So come on into the kitchen with me. We'll show you some techniques and some recipes. And once you get each one, you can use it for a whole number of different dishes. You know, the first course of a dinner is very important because it's what really gets your juices going, and I think it's important also not to overdo it with the hors d'oeuvres, lots of crackers and cheese. Don't have too much at that point because your taste buds will be kind of played out. You want to surprise them a little bit, and I think a very nice way to get started is with a soup. A soup can be elegant, can get your juices going, and also the great thing is it's made completely in advance. So if you have a friend that always comes late, you'd have nothing to worry about. Now, no matter what kind of soup you're going to make, we're going to start with this base of aromatic vegetables. And you notice they're all in the onion family. We've got onion, leek, red onion is fine, a little bit of garlic, or some scallions. And once you start with that base, you can make all kinds of different soups. In order to get going, though, let me show you a little secret for cutting an onion very efficiently. Sometimes you sort of go all over the place with an onion. I'm going to start by making a series of cuts along the lines of the onion, but I'm keeping it together at this side. Then very carefully make a couple of cuts parallel to your cutting board, and then you notice what happens. If I go across it, they fall in nice little pieces. Same thing with a leek. These have been very well washed, which is important. I'm going to use a little of the green, get rid of all this business, and then cut it in half like so, lengthwise, and just quickly slice it. And this will be the base of our soup. And let me show you this. This is something I love in the kitchen. This is actually used for scraping dough, bread dough, if you're kneading it. But it's also very good for picking things up off your board. A little more leek. We'll use about 2 leeks for this soup. And a little more onion. And some salt. Salt helps bring the juices out of the veggies. All right. A garlic clove. Just a little bit for a suggestion of flavor. Pop it down like that. Pops right out of the skin. And you notice I'm not paying too much attention here to how things are cut because it's all going to be pureed later anyway. So just cut them up rough. That's fine. Pop them in and give them a quick toss. I have a little bit of butter in here. You notice I'm using a Silverstone pot, which is terrific for this because, first of all, it lets me use very little fat. And the other thing is that it helps the vegetables to cook slowly without browning at all. And that's what we want here. It's called sweating the vegetables, which means drawing the juices out so they wind up in the soup rather than into themselves, which is what you'd want when you're sautéing. By the way, if you can't get leeks, don't worry about it. Just throw in an extra onion. And if you'd like to add a little scallion in here, that's fine. I'll cut this up rough. I'm just going to use the white part at this point, and later we'll use the green for a little garnish. Pop that in. So you see, it doesn't really matter which of the onion family you use. Toss it, cover it, and we'll cook it over a low or medium heat. And I'd say it would take 15 or 20 minutes for these to soften, and just let it happen like that. And when it's done, it looks like this. Nice and tender. Okay, now for this soup, we're going to use red peppers, which make a very beautifully colored soup. Nice flavor. We'll start out, let me show you a little trick to make it easier to cut up a pepper. Treat it like a box and cut off the 4 sides like so. If you like, you can use the trimmings for something else. And then once you've got that, all you do is cut it in long strips. And again, these can be rough. Don't worry about making these perfect because they're just going to get pureed later anyway. So we'll give them a rough chop like so. Nice big knife is a good thing to have. And invest in a good one. That's that. Again, my scraper. And for this soup, I'm going to use 3 peppers cut up, so I have some more done already. And we're going to sweat these for a couple minutes, just like we did the base. So, give it a quick stir. And cover. And we'll just do that very, very quickly. Now, once you've gotten this concept, you really can make a soup with all kinds of fresh vegetables. Carrots, for instance, make a very nice soup, good color, and if you like, you can flavor that with a little orange rind. It's very nice. You also can do one with fresh asparagus. And for this, just be sure that you break off any tough stem. You can do that like so with your fingers or with a knife. And then with a peeler, start about halfway down on the asparagus and just peel off a little of that skin because you want to make sure that it's not going to be stringy at all. And this looks kind of gross actually, but it's a wonderful vegetable to use for a soup. This is a celery root, and it will give a nice, warm, earthy flavor to your soup. Take a paring knife, slice off the skin. You'll find a nice white interior. You cut that in and put it in just like we did with our other vegetables. Of course, the most basic version of this soup is just a potato and leek soup, which is very delicious, country-style soup. And if you want to dress it up in warm weather, serve it chilled with some cream in it. It becomes vichyssoise. Okay? We will use potatoes, in fact, in every soup that we make because it binds without using flour, which is a nice, light way to do it. And I think we're just about ready for that step. These have softened just slightly. Don't worry about getting them too soft. And at this point, we'll put in our potatoes, which I'm keeping in water here so they don't discolor. A couple of potatoes will give a nice body to this soup. Stir that in. And then you want to add enough liquid just to cover the solids, no matter what your solids are. So we're going to put in canned chicken broth, and canned is fine. Don't worry about that because you just need a basic flavor. The vegetables will give flavor of its own. That's right. Good amount there. About 4 cups, I would say. And now bring it to a simmer, cover it, and cook this until it's nice and tender. That'll take 30 to 45 minutes. Remember, we're going to puree this, so you want those nice and soft. And when it's done, it will look like this. I've got one here already. Now we're ready to puree. So the basic steps we did so far, we sweated our base vegetables, we then put in our potatoes and our liquid to simmer, and now we're ready to puree. So let's get rid of this. Bring this over here. And I'm going to pour this right into a colander. Let's move this over so that I separate the liquids from the solids. Oh, this is going to be beautiful. Wait till you see the color this turns. It's great looking soup. Got a blender. You can use a blender or a food processor. Either is fine. Take some of your solids. You'll have to work in batches because we've got too much here to do it all at once. And then just to make it easier to go, here's a little trick. Put in a little bit of liquid at this point, just enough to get it moving in the blender. And puree. Oh, looking good. Okay. At this point, our puree is fairly thick, you can see. And I've got some pureed here already. We'll put the remaining puree in. Make sure you get it all. And we're going to bring that up to heat. When it's all in, when all your solids and all your puree is in, that's when you go back here and put in some more of your liquid. And at this point, you're going to put in just enough to thin it to the consistency you want. And for a dinner party, don't leave it too thick. For a hearty dinner, just supper at home with the family, you can have a thicker soup. In fact, you can only puree half of it if you like and let there be some pieces of vegetable. But for this, I prefer a thinner, more delicate textured soup. That's going to look nice. And at this point, we bring it back to a boil. This can be done completely in advance. Taste it. Oh, you're going to like this. Little salt, little pepper, just a shot of cayenne pepper. Gives it a little hot edge. Not too much, not too much. You can always put in more. And then, just for color, I'm going to add a little bit of cream. Just maybe a third of a cup, I'd say. This is not a terribly rich soup. And when it's just about heated, there we go. We're coming up. Swirl the, oh, this is going to be wonderful. Look at that color. That is nice. Make sure your seasoning is right. Just another drop of liquid. See, this allows you to control the texture, make it exactly the way you like. Oh, that looks wonderful. And at this point, you've got to decide how to serve it. At the very last minute, put in just a little piece of cold butter, which will give it a little shine and make it nice and smooth. And I think for this dinner party, we'll use a tureen, which means that you can bring the whole thing to the table and serve it at the table, which I think is an easier thing to do at dinner. See the way that butter is swirling in? Look at that color. I just love this. The nice thing is you don't have to carry those soup bowls full to the table, because that's asking for trouble. And we go into the tureen. And we're ready to go. All right, now I've showed you how to make a variety of soups, but for a dinner party you might want to give them a little more flash. So let's find some ways to garnish them, and there are all kinds of things you can do. First of all, one thing I like is arugula. And this is an Italian, peppery green, slightly bitter. You've probably had it in an Italian restaurant. If you can't get it, feel free to do this with watercress. All we're going to do is shred the leaves. You notice I'm taking these stems off. You don't need that. And we'll float these once they're shredded. Keep the pieces not too small. Gather them together. And what we're going to do is float this right on the surface of our simmering pepper soup. This is ready to serve. Bring it to a boil at the time of serving, and watch how I do this. I'm going to scatter this over the surface, but not stir it in. And what this is going to let happen, cover it, and you let that simmer for another 2 or 3 minutes, and what it's going to let happen is that the greens will wilt. They'll cook down slightly, but they'll stay nice and green and a little bit crisp. And those are delicious, and it gives a nice look. Now, a second garnish you can do is homemade croutons. Everybody loves to eat croutons, but the thing is that you probably haven't made them too often homemade. All you've got to do is take some good white bread, cut the crusts off with a serrated knife, and cut them into neat cubes, and saute it in a Silverstone-coated pan. I like it because you don't need to use too much fat in there. I mean, these things can really suck up butter and oil. So I've got a mixture of olive oil and butter, and just toss them until they're nice and golden. I'm going to give these another minute or so, and they'll be just ready. Another thing you can do is a compound butter. And a compound butter is nothing more than some softened butter which you flavor with something. And what I'll use here is some grated lemon zest. This gives a nice flavor to a soup, a little acidic edge. A little bit of lemon juice. I'm going to squeeze this right through my fingers. Natural strainer. Organic, right? And for color, a little bit of paprika, just a little bit. And all we're going to do is mash that all together like so. And if you like, by the way, you can do this right in a food processor or a blender. Now, this is easier to use when it's chilled, so let me show you a quick tip for storing this. I've got a sheet of plastic wrap down here, and I'm going to spoon it down the length in sort of a cylinder shape, like a long cigar, actually. And this is a great little tip, because once you've got this on hand, there's all kinds of things you can do with it. Now watch how I do this. I'm going to fold this over to try to make a nice, neat cylinder, push it sort of towards the center, and then with a spatula, I'll just smooth it out so it's nice and neat. That's working good. And roll it up. It's pretty soft at this stage, but you'll see. Keep it nice and towards the center. There we go. No problem. And then roll it up like you would a piece of taffy. And what I've done here is I've made another batch and I've chilled it. This one I put a little more paprika in. And the great thing about this is you can keep this in the refrigerator or the freezer and just lop off a pat of it. It's great on a steak, broiled lamb chops, chicken, whatever. And for today, we're going to use it with our asparagus soup. Look at that. This looks wonderful. The thing I've done here, if you can see this, is I have taken the tips and I've reserved them. I didn't put them in the soup when I made the asparagus soup. And I've just put them in for the last couple of minutes so that they stay kind of crisp and bright green. Looking good there. Okay. And what I'll do is take my chilled compound butter right from the refrigerator and hack off a little piece and right onto the surface. And as you bring that to the table, that will melt into it and become very, very nice. And the flavor of the asparagus and the lemon work terrific together. Back to my croutons. Just keep an eye on them. Give them a quick toss. And now it's time to use them. Here is our celery root soup. This is, again, a different color. Each one of these soups has its own look. And that's the nice thing about using that method of making soups. You can use the same method and do lots of different things with them. There we go. One final flip, and they're ready. Take a few of these, scatter them on the surface. Everyone loves these, so be sure you take what you don't use and pass them in a little bowl at the table, because people, believe me, they're going to eat them. And I think that could use a little color. So I'll take some scallion greens. You remember before I used the scallion whites in the soup, but for now I'm going to use the greens, and I'm going to cut them very thin slices, but on a very sharp diagonal, like so. And this is just to give it a little color. That soup can use a little something. Put this around like so. Oh, that looks nice. Okay. And then finally, aha, looking nice. We're ready. Turn the heat off. You see how this is still bright green? I don't know if you can see into this pot, but you'll see it in a moment, because I'm going to bring this over. And you don't want to overcook this. This is something you rush into the kitchen, and you just do this for the last moment. And that green gives this soup really a nice touch. Goes nice with this plate, too. I know I said it already, but I love the color of this soup. This is like real day glow. Okay. Gets you off to a real good start. So there we are. 3 soups, 3 garnishes. You can use any of them in any way. And that's a real nice start to a dinner party. You know, at one time, there was a very specific way a menu had to go for a dinner party. They always started with soup, then they moved into a fish course, and finally some kind of a roast. We've gotten way far away from that, because now you can do basically whatever you like. But I think there's something very nice about having a fish course to begin, because it starts you out light, and it lets you have a really good white wine to start. You can then move into a red wine if you like. And what we're going to do now is make a salmon mousseline, which will be used in a number of ways. I'll start with a fillet of fresh salmon. Nice stuff. Have it all well chilled, make a nice smooth mousse, and just cut it into rough chunks, doesn't matter how big they are. And we'll move this right to the food processor and grind it up into a smooth puree. Now let me just say that this is a basic lesson. Once you have this mousseline, you can use it in a variety of different ways. Also, this is the kind of thing that really fools people, because this, when they see this first course, they're going to think that you had to be a great chef to make this. And if you've got a food processor, you don't have to be a great chef at all, because you can make it in minutes, and I'll show you a way you can do it completely in advance. Push this around a little if it needs to. This is fine. And season this. You know, for a while, all kinds of restaurants all over the place were doing these very elegant-looking, beautiful fish mousses. I'm putting in salt, a little cayenne pepper, a little bit of white pepper. A little bit of lemon juice. The problem was they looked beautiful and they had no flavor. All right, so be sure that you season this. I'll put a little shot of cognac in here. Just a little bit. And let's put a whole egg in first. This will hold it together and also give it a nice creamy texture. Get that all together. That's fine. And now we'll put in an egg white. Just the white. Okay. Don't let any shell get in there. And moving right along. Now, you then add very slowly some heavy cream. And I'm adding it slowly so it gets absorbed. And this is basically it. That's it. That's your salmon mousseline. And as I said, I'll be able to use this in a number of different ways. That's plenty of cream. You see the texture there? It runs off the spatula, but it has some body to it. Okay. Now, the basic way you can do this, if you'd like to serve a hot mousse, which is what we're going to do now, is to cook it in a ramekin, a little buttered dish or a custard cup or anything like that. And I have recently found a pan called, are you ready for this name? A buntlet pan. I think the name is a riot, so I like to use this. And it makes a very attractive hot mousse for a first course, because each of these is one serving. So what we'll do is finish this pan, spoon that into here, and be a little neater than I am if you can. And we're just about ready to go. Just fill those to the surface, smooth it out. Get this neat. And one little trick is to wrap this against the surface, which will eliminate any air bubbles, which you don't want in there. Now, here's the secret. I'm going to take a piece of buttered foil and put it down here. And the secret is that you can do this entirely in advance. You can have this in the pan, put your foil on, and put it in the refrigerator, and do that early in the day and forget about it. Then, when it's time for your dinner party, all you do is pop them in the oven, and we're going to cook it in what's called a water bath. And this will keep it nice and tender. Put a little warm or hot water in a roasting pan that's obviously larger than your buntlet pan. And ramekins, you do the same thing. You just put them right in here. And into the oven it goes. And we'll cook these at about 325 for about 25 minutes, I'd say, but until they're firm to the touch. It might be a little more or less depending on the side of your pan. Now, another thing you can do entirely in advance is start your sauce, so that at the end, all you have to do is run into the kitchen, very calmly put together the last stages of this. We're going to make a beurre blanc sauce. Put this on low to medium heat. People think this sauce is very difficult, and it's not at all, as long as you follow a few basic things. We're going to start with a reduction, which is a mixture of chopped shallots, which I'm putting in there, some red wine vinegar, white wine vinegar is also fine, and a little bit of white wine. There are two parts to this sauce. The first is the reduction, and the second is the butter. Now, you bring this to a boil, and you let it cook uncovered until it looks like this. And here's one where the reduction's ready. So have a look in that pot, because this stage is important. If you take a look carefully here, there's almost no liquid left, maybe a spoonful down around there in front, and that's what you're looking for. The French call that marmalade, by the way, and I think you can see why. And at that point, you're ready to add your butter. So if you're doing this in advance, fine, do it to this stage. Then, at dinner time, you pop into the kitchen, pop those into the oven, and you have some cold butter ready. Now, it's important to follow a couple of steps. The first is that your pan should not be too flimsy. It has to have a nice heavy bottom, or else your sauce could burn. The second is that you have it on low heat, and I'm going to add a couple of pieces of cold butter. And here again, I've gotten these ready in advance. This is sitting in the refrigerator. Don't need this anymore. Sitting in the refrigerator, and it's ready to go. Now, if you had this over higher heat, what you'd get would be melted butter. Okay, but we don't want melted butter. This is called beurre blanc, which means white butter. And if you look carefully, I'm going to add a couple pieces at a time, and the butter will become opaque and thick and white and glossy and beautiful. Now, you might have a little bit of a problem looking at all this butter going in here. But remember, this is for 6 people, and don't let your guests see you do it, that's all. You just have a little bit at a time, and you'll be fine. And if you look in there, this is happening just beautifully. Real, real nice. Some people like to strain this out, by the way, but I like the shallots. I think they go nicely with the fish. And the point is, when each addition, when you have 2 little pieces of butter, or 3 or 4, or whatever, when each addition is almost liquefied, but not quite, that's the time to add a little more. And you just keep going, and then you see what we've got, a nice smooth sauce. This sauce has a reputation for being a real tricky thing that you can fail with, and that you're going to be embarrassed, and your guests are not going to know what to do. But believe me, if you follow my little tips here, you'll have no problem at all. And this is going fine. 2 pieces, 3 pieces at a time. And then at the very end, when it's all in, this will just take another moment or 2. At the very end, make sure it's seasoned. Here again, this is light, it's elegant, but what's the point of having elegant food if it has no taste, all right? Taste is really what I'm always looking for with my food, obviously. Although you go to some restaurants and it looks like they care more about what it looks like than what it tastes like. All right, if you see what we've got here, this looks great. And if you've got candles on your table at your dinner party, wait till you see how beautifully this reflects the light. While this is coming together, I'm going to make a garnish for this. And you can put all kinds of things in here, chopped herbs or a little mustard at the end, whatever. I'm going to really go Hollywood here. We have a great special dinner party with good friends coming, so I'm going to cut up some fresh chives. And I'll, again, like I did with the scallions, very sharp diagonal. This makes a nice shape. The only trick I can tell you with this is it's important with fresh herbs, any herb, not to put these in the sauce while it's boiling or while it's over heat, because they're going to turn sort of a dark, drab green, and you don't want that. So there's our chives, and that looks fine, and our sauce is just coming together. And at the very last minute, I'm going to flavor that with a little bit of lemon juice. I have not put any salt here, you notice, because I'm using unsalted butter. So at the very end, I'll put in just a little bit of salt, a little bit of cayenne to give it some kick. You don't want a really perceptible kick, but you don't want it to be flat either. And you notice, oh, that's good. That is good. You notice I started with vinegar. And you want a nice little edge on this sauce, a little sour edge. So add a couple of drops of vinegar at the end, which will cut through the butter. There we go. And I'm taking it off the heat. Time to put in my chives. And we want to really go special here, so I'm going to put in, along with the chives, some red caviar, or salmon roe. Here again, I'm working off the heat, and this is going to be a beautiful fish course. Whisk that in. Your sauce is ready, and it's time to get our mousse out. So very carefully take them out of the oven. I say carefully because you want to be sure that you don't spill the water in the water bath. Foil comes off. Take the pan out of the water bath. And now you're ready to invert them. The trick here is to use a sheet pan with some sides. In case there's any juices in there, it'll collect the juices. And now just pick up both pans, and don't be timid, just flip, like so. And I'm going to give them a quick bang to make sure they're out. And then gently lift off your pans. And everything is beautiful. Okay. Now, everything's ready. All we have to do is assemble it. So here's a serving plate. We'll take a mousse like so. Be very careful. And you notice I'm using a slotted spatula. These aren't too juicy, which is good, but if they are, it'll drain it off. In fact, if they're super juicy, you can just drain it a little on a paper towel. It goes onto your serving plate. Your sauce, of course, is ready. Spoon that right over. Look at that color. And I like these buntlets because it lets the sauce go down like so. And if there's extra sauce, which there will be, just feel free to pass that separately. And believe me, if I came to your house and you served me this, I'd be very, very happy. This is the same salmon mousseline that we just used to make the buntlets, and there are many, many other things you can do with it. One of my own favorites, in fact, is to take a little spoonful of this mixture and to put it on a fillet of sole, fold it over like a sandwich, and poach that in wine. Very, very nice, light first course. Something that I find particularly good for a dinner party, though, is to make a cold pâté out of this, which is actually called a terrine. So I'm using a loaf pan coated with silverstone. And the great thing about this is that not only can you make the mousse in advance, but you actually cook this in advance and serve it chilled. So you have zero work at all at dinner party time. And it means that all you do is plate it, and we'll show you how to make a very nice, attractive plate out of this. Okay, there's our mousse. Spread it in the pan, nice and even. And once again, same thing I showed you before. Clean that off there. It's good. Wrap it on here. Get rid of your bubbles. Get rid of your mess. I like to cook neat. Otherwise, there's this growing panic, like when am I going to do all my cleanup? And that's no fun. Smooth the top. I'm smoothing the top with this firm plastic spatula. And then we're going to do the exact same thing we did before, which was to cook this in the oven in a water bath. Covered with foil to keep it moist. And we'll put just a little bit of water in here. And frankly, what I really prefer to do is to take this without the water, pop it in the oven on the shelf, and then do the water. Otherwise, you have it sort of splashing all over the kitchen. All right, we put that in. You bake this at 325 just until it's firm, usually about an hour. Although, again, don't trust my times. Just look at it. That's the thing about cooking. You have to get the feel for it, and then you know what you're doing. And here we have one that is all finished. You see it's nice and firm in the center, and I've chilled this already. Again, we're going to unmold, like so. Be nice and firm with it. Don't be afraid of your food. Straighten it out. And lift. And there we are. Okay. Now, this will be sliced in the kitchen right on this board, and I'll plate it, as I said, but first I'm going to make a little sauce. We don't want to serve this with the beurre blanc we showed before because it'll be served cold. So for a cold sauce, we're going to start with a mayonnaise. And making mayonnaise is another one of those things. People think, oh, I could never do it myself. But with a food processor, or a blender especially, it's a cinch. Watch how fast this goes. I've got an egg yolk and a whole egg in here. I'm going to flavor this with some whole grain mustard and some smooth mustard, Dijon mustard. A little bit of lemon juice, and it's the acid that really helps the oil come together. And just for a nice blend of flavors, I'll put in a little red wine vinegar too. And don't forget salt and pepper. And I'll use cayenne pepper again. You've seen me use that. And now, get it going and start adding your oil. And at first you start slow. And you can watch what's happening. This is going to thicken, but you notice it's coming in a nice steady stream, nice and thin. And once it starts to thicken slightly, you can add it a little more quickly. That's working just fine. Zero effort. It's really no problem at all. This, again, you can do in advance. Do this the day before and chill it. I'm going to use, for a blend of flavors, vegetable oil and an olive oil. Look at this wicked green color. That's nice. If I used all olive oil, it might be a little too intense, so I'm blanding it out a little with some vegetable oil. It's coming together. Can you see what's happening in there? This is going to be good. And you just keep going. And that's it. Homemade mayonnaise, 40 seconds. And just to lighten this up a little, I'm going to put in some sour cream. Okay, because we're serving this cold, I want a nice, gentle flavored sauce. And I'll just get that in quickly. And now's the time to taste. Make sure you have a nice, lemony tasting sauce. Good. Good, good, good. A little more lemon. Oh, that olive oil is delicious. You know, olive oil is really good for you. It's one of those things that you, unlike everything else you hear about, it actually is good for you. A little more of this whole grain mustard. That gives a nice hit there. And then we're going to make an herb sauce by using a combination of chopped fresh parsley, chopped fresh dill, And chopped fresh chives. Whatever you've got in season is fine. Basil works well, tarragon, whatever. I am not going to process this very long because otherwise the greens will get shredded and turn my sauce green. Make it look nice and green. You know, the thing, some people just don't trust their own instincts. I mean, if a recipe tells you add half a cup of herbs and you don't think it's green enough, do it. Make it look good. You're the one who has to like it. Oh, that looks nice. Can you see this, the color on here? That's real nice. Okay, we're ready to do our plate. This is done in advance. Our terrine is done in advance. First thing you'll do is get your slices. Cut the end off first. And that's for you, the end. Oh, this is looking wonderful. Very smooth mousse. Can you see that? I'd be very happy to eat that. And we'll get our plate. I'm going to use a couple of Bibb lettuce leaves to garnish this, which I've gotten ready a little beforehand. Get my slice together here. This is a very nice mousse mixture we've got. Put it on the plate, like so. Tuck it under those leaves. Come on, you leaves, get in there. That's nice. And a little bit of sauce. I'm just going to put a little on. Some people like their sauce on the side. So what we'll do is just dab a little bit of sauce and pass the rest in a sauce boat. And that's that. You know, one of the things that can really throw you into confusion with a dinner party is getting everything out onto the table at the same time. It might not be hard to cook vegetables or boil potatoes, but having it all come together right is what throws a lot of people. What I want to show you now is a trick, and this is the way they do it in restaurants to make sure that everything comes together at the same time. For green vegetables, let me show you how to pre-cook them so that you don't have any worry at all at dinner time. And one of my own favorites that I like to serve in my own house is sugar snap peas. This is actually a new hybrid. It came out in about 1979, and what it is, it's an edible pod, and inside, I'll break this one open. Let me show you what I got here. Inside are whole peas, okay? And this is a very delicious vegetable. You do have to take these strings off. So you start at the stem end, like so, and pull, and that's it. And this is what they look like when they're ready to go. Now what we're going to do is blanch them. And blanching is one of those words you hear sometimes in cookbooks, and you think, what are they talking about? All it means is boiling them in a big pot of boiling water. So I've got my water ready. I'll put some salt in. I like coarse kosher salt, by the way. It's a nicer flavor and kind of gentler. And then all you do is cook these very, very quickly. Okay, you just want them to come to the boil, or not even, less than a minute, I'd say. And that lets them stay nice and green, and you just want them to be just crisp tender, just edible, but not mushy. That's one of the things we all learned, that vegetables can be so much better when they're crisp. So I'm just going to leave them another second or so, and then what I've got ready in my sink is a big colander, and I'm going to quickly dump them into that colander. All right, that's it. That's it. So over to the sink, and in they go. This is a nice big colander, which is great because it'll let them cool off in a hurry. Immediately, run cold water over them. Give them a little shower here. Get them tossing. And what I'm doing, this is called refreshing them, by the way. What I'm doing is I'm stopping the cooking so they won't overcook, and I'm also setting the green color. See what a great color we got on this? This can be done the day before, it can be done the morning of your party, no problem. And you can also use the exact same technique with all kinds of other vegetables like broccoli. You can do this with cauliflower, carrots, green beans. Shake them dry. Put them on a plate. I'll do it with my hands, I think. Get less water. Really drain them well. Okay, I've stopped the cooking. They're already cool. There we go. And there we are. What I'll do is put a piece of plastic wrap over this, and I'll put these in the fridge until I need them. Then, at dinner time, get out a big skillet, put some butter in the skillet, make sure these are nice and dry, and away you go. That should do. And all you're going to do is cook them until they're heated through. So you see, the great advantage here is that when your guests are there and you have your roast coming out or whatever you're going to make, you don't have to think, gee, are they done? Are they done too early, too late, whatever. All you do is make sure that they're hot. And whoops, that's for me. A little salt. These are wonderful. Little pepper. Get them nice and hot. And you're ready to go. Now, this same idea, let me put these in a serving platter first. Oops. You can also, if you like, spoon these onto the plate right from the skillet and serve plate style like they do at restaurants. But that looks terrific, I think. That's nice to bring out, and you see that that green color really makes a difference. Now, let me show you something else. We're going to try the same thing, same exact technique, but with 3 different vegetables. And this will be very colorful, especially if you're serving a roast, something that has one color itself. We'll start with a red onion, and I'm going to cut it a little differently from the way I normally do. I'm going to cut it into thin slivers right along the lines, okay, of the onion. And I've got some started a little earlier. So, add a little to that. Just sauteing those in a little butter. Add some to that. And you don't want these to be too cooked. In fact, leave them a little crisp, and they'll go with the rest of your vegetables. And to keep them red and add a little bit of flavor, I'm going to put some balsamic vinegar. And many of you may have used this. This is an aromatic vinegar from Italy that I like a lot. Turn down the heat a little bit. And now, to go with this color, move this out of the way. To go with this, I'm going to put in some green beans and some carrots that I'll blanch the exact same way I did the sugar snap peas. I'll show you first how I cut them. I take the green beans and I cut the ends off on a diagonal, like so. And then I cut them in half on a diagonal. So my pieces are approximately the same size as my pieces of onion. Next, carrots. What I'll do is cut a very long slice from the thick end, like so, cutting on a diagonal. And then what I'll do here is, using a gentle rocking motion, cut these into sort of thick julienne. And you notice this rocking motion I'm using, it makes cutting very, very easy, okay, because you don't have to use much weight. The weight of your body does the work, especially if you've got a nice, good knife. What I've got here are some that I've done a little earlier. This is my blanched carrots, my blanched green beans, exactly the way I did the sugar snap peas. These do take a little longer, but with any vegetable, just let it get crisp tender. And at dinner time, you're ready to serve your main course. Toss it in here. Coat them with butter. That's all you're doing, really, is to coat them and reheat them. And look how nice that looks, that 3 colors together. Very, very simple, but simple things, you know, can really be the best. Okay, when they're nice and hot, make sure everything's hot. Great, ready to go. Over to our serving plate, and for this one again, we'll serve family style. Bring this to the table and let people help themselves. And there we are. 2 vegetable side dishes done completely in advance, no trouble at dinner time. You know, a lot of times people ask me, I like to cook dinner parties, but what should I serve as a starch? Well, I have plenty of answers for that because I'm a complete starch freak. I could eat nothing but pasta, potatoes, and polenta and be very happy. One of the things I like to do for a dinner party is to make a gratin. And this is a gratin dish, which is low and shallow. And gratin in French, by the way, means crust, and it refers to the way it browns when it bakes. One of the most basic ones is a potato gratin. Delicious. People really love eating this because it has lots of cream in it, lots of milk, and it's just good earthy food. Use a waxy potato, which I have here, a boiling potato, and just cut it into thin slices. This is a very good use, by the way, for a food processor. But frankly, I use a knife. All right, and keep going. You'll need several potatoes to fill that dish. Also, the basic version of this is just potatoes and milk or cream. We're going to put a little leek in because I have some leek greens left over from making a soup. So I'll slice these in, and between 2 of the layers, we'll just put these in. Now, leek greens are a little less tender than the leek whites, So what I'm going to do is blanch these. You will know all about blanching, of course, by dipping them in boiling water just for a minute or so until they soften up a bit, and that's what they'll look like. First thing we have to do is get our dish ready. So let me put this here. And an old French trick is to rub a dish with a garlic clove first, and it gives it just a hint of garlic flavor. You know, everybody says, oh, I could never eat garlic, I could never eat garlic, and everyone loves garlic, but just be subtle with it. And then get some soft butter and butter your dish. And I've got another one that I started a little earlier. And with the first layer, all you have to do is bang your potatoes right in there, salt them lightly, a little bit of nutmeg. Fresh nutmeg has a lot more flavor. This little thing is called a nutmeg grater. Obvious choice. And we'll put our leek greens over here, which I've shaken nice and dry. Okay. Now, for the last layer of potatoes, you do need to take just a little more care because you want to have a nice overlapping pattern, like so. Sort of like roof tiles. And you know, the French name for this is gratin dauphinois, okay, which is nothing more than potato gratin with cream, although a lot of versions you see have cheese added to it, which is okay. I mean, what could be bad, right? Potatoes and cheese. But the real version of it, the real creamiest version, has no cheese, just potatoes and cream and a little milk. So I'm doing that. You know what's funny, though? People hear gratin dauphinois, they think it must be fancy food. But look at this. It's really just scalloped potatoes. Okay, so let's just call something what it is. Potatoes baked with cream is what I usually call it, to tell you the truth. And when it's ready, I've got my cream and milk heating up, and that's something that can be very tricky. You know, you can scorch and burn the bottom. I'm using a pan here that's coated with Silverstone Supra, which means that it's not going to stick to the bottom no matter what happens. Let's start from this side. Now pour this over gently. You don't want to disturb that pattern that you took all that trouble to make. There we go. Oh, this is one of my favorite things to have. Very gently, and it should just come up to the bottom of the top layer of potatoes. I think you can see that there. Let's put this guy over a little bit, and we're ready to go to the oven. This will take about an hour. I started at about 450 in a real hot oven, and when it gets nice and crusty, I turn the oven down to 350 or 375, and it should take about an hour total. Now, I did start one earlier. Oh, this is looking so nice. If you go to the fancy, fancy restaurants in France, you'll get a little square of this on your plate. Look at that. And the nice thing about this is that I can make it completely in advance and keep it covered with foil, keep it warm. And if you want to reheat it, if it's looking a little dry, just dribble a little more milk or cream over there when you reheat it. And that's it. Once you've got that principle of gratins down, you can do it with just about any vegetable. Rutabagas are delicious. The celery root that you saw before makes a delicious gratin, either in slices or you can grate it. What we're going to do now is make one with sweet potatoes and pears. Very unusual, and it'll glaze up very nicely, get nice and brown, and look great. The sweet potato, of course, you peel and slice just like we did the regular potatoes earlier. And with the pears, once you've peeled them, just quickly cut it into quarters like that. And then with a small, sharp paring knife, get rid of the core. There will be a little bit in each quarter, like so. No problem. Just quickly get that out. And then we'll cut it into slices. Basically, I'm just cutting them to match the sweet potato slices, so they're the same thickness and they'll cook about the same speed. All right, there we are. I've got one started here. We have a layer of sweet potatoes on the bottom that I salted a little bit and put a little melted butter. Then our pears, and for a nice color and flavor, I'm putting on pure maple syrup, just drizzling on a couple tablespoons, not a whole lot. And then we finish it with a final layer of the sweet potatoes. Again, overlapping like roof tiles, just one after the other, and keep going all the way around. Okay, I won't take the time to do all of this, but I think you got the idea. And once they're on there, just brush that with a little bit of melted butter. No need to exaggerate, but this will help get it out of the pan nicely. And then we will top it with a piece of foil. Put it in a 400-degree oven for about an hour, and for the last few minutes of that time, I'll take the cover off so it'll get nice and glazed and crispy and come out terrific. And when it does come out, it'll look like so. And this is something, again, you can do in advance, and all you have to do at serving time is to pop it back to reheat it slightly. Now that you've got this gratin principle down, I want to show you a very good variation, and this really is one of my favorite things to eat in the world. It's called polenta, which is an Italian word for a cornmeal pudding, and in Romania, in fact, it's called mamaliga, but it's really the same thing. And it's nothing more than cornmeal, plain old cornmeal, cooked in liquid. If you look at old recipes for this, they'll tell you to stir it continually to remove lumps for about 45 minutes to an hour. And I don't know about you, but I can't be bothered. So I figured out a way to not have to do that for so long. First, bring some liquid to a boil. We've got a mixture of milk and water, flavored with a little bit of freshly grated nutmeg. I'm not going to salt this at all because we're going to use some cheese with this, and the cheese may be salty, so we'll see later if we need it. Bring that to a boil, and meanwhile, I've got some cold milk that I've held back on, and I will whisk the cornmeal gradually into the cold milk. And what this does is it prevents lumps at this stage rather than while you're cooking it, so you don't have to stand there for all day. You know, I've got to tell you, I saw in a newspaper a gadget advertised, an electric cornmeal polenta stirrer for 75 bucks. I'll tell you, that's really for the person who has everything. I had to laugh at that one. All right. Just let it all go in. You'll see there's no problem here. No lumps at all. And then when it's in, that's it. We're ready to go into our boiling liquid. Get any less lumps out of here. Fine. And in we go very gradually into our hot liquid. And this is where you're supposed to stand all day. And just whisk it, and it will start to thicken. And when it starts to thicken, we'll change to a wooden spoon. However, first thing I want to do is get the remaining ingredients ready. We will layer this in a buttered gratin dish, which I've got there, and I'm going to use a selection of 4 cheeses. And just to keep this Italian, because I love Italian food, we will use 4 Italian cheeses. Here I have a fresh mozzarella made by Aldo. Thank you, Aldo. Here's an Italian fontina, gorgonzola, which is an Italian blue cheese, and some Parmesan, which we will grate fresh. Now, what we'll do is combine all our cheeses in one bowl so it's easier to layer this. Here's our mozzarella, which is diced. Fontina is diced. The gorgonzola we've just crumbled. And I'll hold back on a little bit of the Parmesan because we'll use that for the topping. Keep that here. And very, very gently toss this together, and that'll make it easier to combine everything else. Now, for a little color and a little extra zip, before I get to the zip, let me go back here, and you see this is thickening. And all you need to cook this for is, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that. You'll see it start to thicken in a minute. But first, I want to show you these. These you may not be familiar with. This is called a sun-dried tomato. Okay, very trendy right now. You'll let your friends know you're really up on things. And really what it is a tomato that's been dried in the sun. It's exactly the same as a prune, but it's a tomato, and it has a remarkable, intense, concentrated tomato flavor, which will go great with these cheeses. And I've cut these, I've drained them from their olive oil, and I've cut these cheeses, these tomatoes into slivers, and I've got them ready to be layered with the polenta. Okay, that's our garnishes, and we'll go back to our polenta and see how we're doing. Just fine. Take a look at this consistency here. You want it to cook till it's nice and thick like that, and the time may vary. Different cornmeals will cook up differently, so just cook till it's nice and thick. Turn the heat down a little if necessary. It's going to start to spit at you, which is no fun. And now we're ready to start layering. First, let me put a little butter in here. If you're going to do it, go all the way. A little pepper. This is going to be wonderful eating. Stir that in. Fine. And now, I'll switch to a ladle. And we'll ladle in about a third. Don't worry if it's not exact. And you see at this stage, the polenta is very liquid. Okay, it's like a mush almost, and that's fine. But I'll show you how we're going to let this stand for a bit. That's about a third. Spread it out. And it's time for the cheese. Put about half of the cheese down on here. Oh, this is going to be wonderful stuff. A little more polenta. Oh, sorry, forgot our tomatoes. Half the tomatoes. Can't forget that. It'll give just a burst of flavor. People have trouble guessing what these are, in fact. Notice now I'm putting a second, third but I'm not disturbing our garnish. And as we're working even, it's becoming thicker, and that's fine. That's fine, looking fine. And now we want the remaining cheese. Great. Remaining tomatoes. That's fine. And the rest of the polenta goes on top. Here again, don't disturb your garnish. You know what? I'm going to make this easier and just get it right out of the pot, like so. And we're ready. Now, this is the point at which you can prepare this in advance. When you get it to this stage, just spread this on. Spread it smooth, and put a piece of wax paper right on the surface. Butter the wax paper first and it won't stick. It's okay, a little of that's peeking through and that'll make it nice. They'll wonder what's in there. Wax paper goes on here, and you can let this stand at room temperature for an hour or two, or if you do it earlier than that, that's fine. Just do it in the refrigerator. Then, when it's time to do this, and I would say you'd put this in at about the time you're serving your first course, so it's ready to be eaten as a side dish with your main course. When you're ready, a little more Parmesan cheese. You can dot this with butter if you like, but I think it's rich enough. And it's ready to go into a 425 oven until, get our oven ready, until it's nice and glazed and golden brown, which should take about a half hour, 35 minutes. And just so you can see it, I've got one here ready for you. And I think you'll see that this is a very tempting thing. Sizzling and looking good. Put it right there. And you see how that makes a nice crust. This we will serve alongside a roast, but frankly, I could make a dinner of this and a salad and a nice glass of red wine. That may have been peasant food, but ask me and I'd say it's fit for a king. All right, we're ready to tackle the main course. Of course, it's the centerpiece of the meal, so you want to do something special. And a lot of people tell me that they find roasts kind of a problem. You have to do them at the last minute. You're worried, is it done? Is it not done? I want to show you several tricks that will let you take all the guesswork out of roast, because a roast can really be a very special thing for a dinner party. Remember, it requires zero effort at the end of the meal. Now, especially appropriate for dinner parties are certain luxury cuts, and probably the Rolls Royce of all of them is a tenderloin of beef. And the great thing about a tenderloin is it's very tender, of course, good flavor, and it's a great excuse for a good bottle of red wine, or a great bottle of red wine if you're so disposed. I have here a tenderloin of beef that I've asked my butcher to completely trim, and this is a good idea. What that means is he's taking off the skin. Okay, there's a silvery looking skin, and if any pieces of that are left on, don't worry about it. Just take a paring knife and sliver them off. He's also taken off the fat, but if he leaves on a little coating, that's fine. Don't worry about it. What I've got here for 6 or 8 people is a 2 to 2.5 pound piece once it's trimmed. By the way, this end is where the filet mignon comes from, and there's sometimes a narrow tail that comes along there, and if that comes along with it, I would cut that off, but please use it. That makes a great steak tartare, beef stroganoff, whatever. This end is the thicker end of the tenderloin, and that's the Chateaubriand. We're going to roast this very, very simply. I don't want to bring a lot of extraneous flavors into here, so I'll put it in a roasting pan. All you want is a little bit of salt, not too much. I'm using kosher salt again. A little bit of pepper and some oil. And I'm going to use a delicious olive oil. Okay, and just rub that in nice and good. And it's ready to go. Now this piece will take about 45 minutes, I would say, at 425. So that means you should put it in about the time your guests are sitting down to dinner, or even a little before, maybe when they're having their drinks. And I want to show you a trick that will take all the guesswork. You don't want to be sitting there having a glass of wine with your friends and thinking, oh, is my roast overdone? And this is one cut of meat you do not want overdone. Rare, please, or medium rare if you must. This gadget is a great time and trouble saver. It's called an instant reading meat thermometer, and unlike the old-fashioned meat thermometer where you stick it in at the beginning of the roast, what you do is you just keep this around, keep it in your kitchen, and when you think your meat is almost done, go to the oven and stick this in the thickest part of the roast. Now this is true for any roast, okay? If you have a pork roast, for instance, or something with bones, just don't stick it on the bone because the bone will be hotter than the rest of it. For rare beef, you want it to be about 130 degrees. Okay, so you have that ready. I do want to show you one other trick, which is tying up this piece of meat. You notice I've got a couple of ties on here already. And I'll just show you the way to do this. You can do this right in the pan, or you can also do it on your board. Take a long piece of string, be nice and generous, and I'm going to go left over right and leave it loose, leave it down there. I'm going to go left over right again, repeat the same thing on top, like so. And then when you've got it together, just pull that down right to the meat, and everything is beautiful, like that. Okay, it's time to put the meat in our 425 oven, but I have done one in advance, so we don't have to worry about the timing. And we'll get it out. And, oh, look at that. That is beautiful. Okay, it's just nice and rare inside. It does get good and brown on the outside. Now, one trick some recipes forget to tell you, and it's crucial to a good roast, is to let the roast rest after it comes out of the oven. I'd say 10, 15 minutes. Let me tell you why. Taking a chef's fork without piercing the meat and transferring this to a carving board and just letting it sit there for 10 or 15 minutes. So plan this timing in. If you have 45 minutes to roast it, you then need to add 10 or 15 minutes to that. So the reason you're doing that is if I cut into this right now, the juice is going to run out all over the board. You don't want the juice on the board, you want the juice in the meat, right? So in order to get the juice back into the meat, let it sit there and all that juice will come back. Okay, and that's true for any roast at all, roast turkey, roast chicken, whatever. Now, we have here some very nice brown bits in the roasting pan, and we're going to deal with them in a minute. Okay, but first I want to make a base for the sauce. Don't throw that away, though. Important. Our sauce base. This can be done in advance, just like you can set your roast up in advance. So do this earlier in the day, and then you won't have to think about it. Then we'll use it for that pan in a moment. I'm going to start with a hot skillet, put a little butter in there, and a little olive oil. And we're going to make a very light pan gravy in here. And while that's heating up, I'm going to take out some mushrooms, which I'll put into my pan gravy to garnish them. And we'll use two kinds of mushrooms blended together. The first is this one. It's called shiitake mushrooms. You can also sometimes find them called golden oak mushrooms. And this is a wild mushroom, although it is being cultivated now. And you know, so many things have happened in the last 10 years in this country with food. So many things we never saw before. And one of the most exciting is wild mushrooms, because you now find all different types, and they can really make a dish special. See, I'm doing a very simple garnish here, but it's going to be very special because of these mushrooms. If they're dirty, wipe them with a damp cloth. Trim off any tough, woody stems. And let's take 2 or 3 nice ones here. Trim off the stems like so. Those stems can be kind of tough, so just be sure that you don't want that part in there. And once again, I'll show you how to cut these to make it easier so they don't roll all over the place. Cut it in half first, and then put the flat side down. Okay, so I'll do that with all of them. And then once we've got them halved, these are very firm, by the way, which is good. You want a nice firm mushroom. Once you've got them halved, cut them in thick slices. If they're too thin, they'll cook soft. And you know, somebody was saying to me the other day, boy, I could never chop like you chop or slice. You go so fast. And I don't really go fast. You should see some of these. Watch a Chinese chef sometime. I mean, they go a mile a minute. But the secret is I'm holding my fingers with the flat side of the finger against the side of the knife blade. In other words, not like that, so I can then, you know what, which you don't want to do. Okay, quickly give these a nice chop. And I'm going to blend these, as I said, with some sliced regular mushrooms. And you can use all of either kind. That's fine. Cook these quickly over nice high heat, and they'll stay firm. We'll put both kinds of mushrooms in there, and just to flavor them a little bit of chopped shallot. Let them sit for a minute. You know, I once was in cooking school when I first started out, and I was sauteing some mushrooms, and I just started tossing them as soon as they got in. Put a little salt in here, just a little bit, because our beef may be salty. And the chef, my teacher, said, hey, don't do that. Let them sit there for a minute, and they'll really get that nice sautéed flavor. So, let it sit, then very quickly toss them. And I can't tell you the exact amount of butter. I put maybe a tablespoon of butter and 1 of oil, but mushrooms can really suck up oil and butter, so you may need to add a little more. If the pan's getting dry, feel free to add a little. And just let those go for a moment, and then we're going to make the beginning of our gravy. And we'll start with some Madeira wine. Now this will add a nice, nutty flavor to it. If you don't have Madeira, you can use Marsala, you could use sherry. Any of those are fine. Just give your mushrooms a moment. You don't want them to be too soggy when it's done. And then add maybe 3/4 cup Madeira. Oh, what the heck, put it all in. Got special guests coming for dinner. And then when that cooks for a moment, I'll add some beef broth, just a little bit, and we'll let that cook for a moment. Okay? And that's it. That's our sauce base, and I will have that ready. I'll put it off to the side, and it'll be ready when we need it. Now it's time. I think I want that cooked just a little more. You know what? I'm going to do it right in the pan. Let me show you this, because this is the trick you need to know. A lot of times recipes don't tell you this. When your pan is ready, you're about to serve your meat. You see these little brown bits in here? That is where all your beef flavor is. It's left in those little brown concentrated bits, and those you definitely want for your gravy. So what I'm doing is putting this over 2 burners right on the stove top, and sometimes recipes don't tell you this, as I said, so please do it. If there's extra fat in the pan, get it out of there, but a tenderloin of beef is very lean, so there usually isn't. And then to dissolve those, the term is called deglazing. And the thing you do is you add your liquid, and of course we're going to use our delicious mushroom-flavored, wine-flavored liquid. See what's happening here? Now sometimes these can be a real pain in the neck. They get very crusty and stuck to the pan. But I'm using, again, a pan that's coated with Silverstone, so they're going to come right up. All right. All right, and just give a quick little scrape to dissolve those. Oh, I wish you could smell this. This is nice. Okay. Your guests can smell it, though. Believe me, they know something good's coming. You get them primed with that good red wine, and you're going to be set. There's our gravy. Let that cook down a little. The flavors will reduce, and while you do that, this is now ready to be dealt with. Nice, sharp carving knife. Get the string off. There we go. Cut off the end. Maybe one of your guests likes an end cut. My father always asked for an end cut. And you see we have a nice pink piece of beef. I'd say 2 and possibly 3 slices per portion. And watch what happens as we go to the center there. They're getting nice and juicy and rare, and we've lost no juice. Okay, no problem here at all. Move this back a little bit. Make sure your carving knife is sharp. This is not the time to be dealing with any problems. All right, this is looking just fine. You notice I want a nice, light pan gravy. This is not a thickened, flour-thickened turkey gravy like Grandma used to make. Okay, this is very gently thickened just by boiling it down for a moment. Now, if there's one theme to giving a dinner party, and you've heard me say this many, many times in this video cookbook, it's have as many things possible done in advance. So the trick is get all your components ready at this point. We have our beef ready. Our gravy is now ready, so I'm going to take it and put it in a sauce boat. Very carefully. Look at that. Nice juice. All right. Make sure you get your mushrooms. There we are. Put that over here. You remember our veg combo. We had 3 different kinds of stir-fried vegetables. I've got those ready in advance. I'm just tossing them, as I told you, in a little butter. And I've got in the oven my potato gratin. Bubbly and looking wonderful. This was made in advance, and all I've done is reheat it, put it over here. And what I really prefer to do for this kind of a dinner party is to do my plates out in the kitchen. In other words, it's too unwieldy to pass this around a table, although you certainly could if you prefer. But what I prefer to do is to set it up like they would in a restaurant, like so. 130 degrees, and you'll get that nice, perfect, rare, juicy beef. And boy, is this tender. And with our sauce ladle, make sure everybody gets a little bit of mushrooms. And you see, cutting them thick like that is what keeps them nice and firm. Just a light juice. Make sure your plate is beautiful, and we're ready to go. Okay, now that you've got your roasting technique together, we'll try it with an equivalent cut, very similar to the beef tenderloin, and this is a boneless center cut loin of pork. Very juicy, tender slices, comes out perfect. And what I'm going to do is to make a dry marinade, mixing crumbled bay leaves, thyme, ginger, some fresh garlic, and a little bit of salt and pepper. And this will give lots of flavor to the pork. Pork can really take a lot of flavor. A lot of us think of pork as sort of an everyday meat, and press it, massage it right into the meat. This is going to really make this very, very tasty. But if you cook it right, pork can be perfect for a dinner party. In fact, what I'm going to do here is something pretty radical you might not have thought of, and that's serve it lukewarm. Okay? Which means you can roast this completely before your guests ever arrive and have it out of the oven and sliced. Why? Pork takes a little longer. So in order to not even think about it, we're going to pop it into a 450-degree oven. When it gets brown, after about 20 minutes, we'll turn the heat down to 350 and roast it until what? Until it's done by the meat thermometer. Okay? 170 on a meat thermometer for pork will come out perfect and not too overcooked. You do want to keep pork juicy, so don't overdo it. As I said, we're going to serve this lukewarm, and it is done in advance. And I've got one that I've done a little earlier, and it's here. Get rid of this. And it looks wonderful. It's juicy inside. Look at those slices. But the outside is nice and crisp, especially with that wonderful herb crust on there. And this you can do before your guests ever come. So I've got some of it sliced, beautiful platter. And what I'll do is just keep going. Like so. Don't be afraid of using your fingers, actually. You know, as long as they're clean, they work better than any tools in handling food. And I really think one of the things I like best about cooking is touching the food. So, that's ready. I'll put a sheet of saran wrap over that, and it's time to make a sauce. This is a very easy olive oil-based sauce with fresh herbs. And to give it a little color and some terrific flavor, I'm going to quickly roast a red pepper and a yellow pepper. If you haven't had a yellow pepper yet, believe me, you're in for a treat. All you do is get it over a high flame until all the sides are blackened like so, and then they're ready to be popped into a paper bag. Why do I do that? Because it will steam off the skins, and when they come out of that bag after about 10 minutes, seal them up tight. When they come out of there after about 10 minutes, they look like so. And the skins, you pull them right off. It's a cinch to deal with that. And then just take out the ribs, the seeds, and the stems, and you're ready to go. Make a few extra, by the way, because these are great in pasta, in a salad, or even by themselves with a little oil and vinegar. So, I've got some chopped peppers. The juices here are terrific. Put those right into your sauce. We'll flavor this sauce with a little bit of balsamic vinegar, that aromatic vinegar that I've mentioned. A little bit of red wine vinegar. Some pepper. And now, go crazy with fresh herbs. I've got sage. I've got some parsley. Whatever you can get, basically, you can put in here. Make a nice blend. Fresh herbs are another one of those foods that were not so available to us. I mean, they've always been around, but they were hard to get in supermarkets. And now you see them all over. Chives, tarragon, a little bit of chopped red onion, chopped celery. We want some texture. And again, for a little more color, I'm going to put some chopped hard-cooked egg. Nice white and yellow hit in there. Quickly stir it up. Look at the colors we're getting in there. This sauce, by the way, is terrific over anything grilled. Grilled fish, cold meat, shrimp. whatever. Make sure that your flavorings are all there. I'm going to put a little more of these herbs because they're doing something very nice there. Just a little more vinegar, and we're ready to go. I'll put this in a sauce boat because I want to have it on the table. And it's almost like a salad, really. You can put a little more oil if you like, but I think that's just right. I really like to kind of clean up as I go while I cook. It makes me feel organized, even if I'm not. Although being organized, obviously, is something that you want to do when having a dinner party. Here's our pork. The sauce is ready. And to go with it, and for a little extra color, I've sautéed some cherry tomatoes with some blanched broccoli florets. Nice color combo. And we'll serve this with our sweet potato gratin. I'll ladle a little of this over and pass the rest of the table. And this meal is completely made in advance, and it's especially nice in spring or in autumn, perfectly for that kind of weather. Now we're going to do a main course and a complete dinner that you can do entirely in advance, a day in advance, and just reheat at serving time. And in fact, it'll even be better if you do it that way. We're going to make a braised dish, a veal stew, but this is no ordinary stew. First, we'll start with a veal shoulder. This is a less choice cut than the tenderloin we used before, but still a very nice piece of meat. And ask your butcher to cut it in 1 to 1.5 inch cubes. Okay? And sautéing veal is a little bit tricky, because it can give off some liquid. So it's important that you dredge this in flour and shake off all excess. We just want a tiny, tiny coating, very light coating, see that, of flour. And then it's also important to use a heavy pan, which I'm using here, and not to crowd the pan. If you see what I've got in here, I've got one layer, don't let them crowd, and use nice high heat. I'll get that even a little higher. Got a mixture of butter and olive oil. And just quickly turn them, and they should brown very, very quickly, maybe 5 minutes, I'd say, on all sides. Get a nice, good color, because that's what's going to give color to our finished stew. Oh, this is looking good. Okay, and I'll toss these very quickly. Now, this stew, you must make the veal in batches. Okay, if you did it all at once, you'd have it stewing and steaming and everything else, and you wouldn't seal in the juices of the meat. When it's done, take that out. In fact, it's even easier if you use a slotted spoon. Drain the fat right back in here, and we'll use it for the next batch. Collect this on a plate and just set it aside. And then, when that's done, we'll put in some aromatic vegetables that will give flavor to the stew. I've got onion, celery, carrots. You can also put in a little garlic if you like, some herbs. Give that a quick toss, nice high heat. There we go. See my brown bits? Once again, that principle is the same as we had before. Those bits have all the flavor in it, and that's what's collected from sautéing the veal. And what we'll do is deglaze. And again, it can be any liquid. I'll put a little shot of cognac in here. That'll be nice. And then we'll put some tomatoes. These are canned tomatoes. You can use fresh ones, but I prefer the canned unless they're the best ripe fresh tomatoes. I've drained them very well because these tomatoes will actually thicken this stew as it cooks. I'll break them up, chop them up. You know, in the old-fashioned way of cooking, you used a lot more flour. We just have that little bit of flour on the veal, which is fine. It'll help keep that juicy. But we don't want an overly thick sauce. We just want a nice light gravy on here. Let those cook for a minute. Then it's time to pop the meat back in. And if this gives off any juice, if there's any juice on the plate, just throw it right in there. And then we'll moisten with a little bit of white wine. Maybe a cup. Good stuff. And a little bit of broth. You can use a canned chicken broth if you like, or beef broth, whatever. Canned is fine in this case because you see the veal itself will give up nice meat flavor. This will cook slowly. And you can simmer it either on top of the stove like this or in the oven. And I really do like the oven. First, though, you should put a piece of foil on here and then the lid. Now, why am I using this foil? I want this gravy to thicken a little bit. And if the steam condenses on the lid and goes back into the gravy, it's only going to thin it, right? So in order to make that nice and thick, I'll put the foil on, and that will catch the condensation. Okay, we've got our oven ready, and I'll pop this in the oven, and it'll cook about 2 hours until the veal is tender. The only tip I can give you here is please make sure that it's simmering, not boiling. You want a nice, gentle cook to get that meat nice and tender, because otherwise it'll toughen. As soon as it's tender, take it out, let it cool, and then refrigerate it overnight. Now, at serving time, we're going to get some mushrooms going. And let me show you a cut that I like a lot. If the mushroom stems are very long, you can trim them off a little bit, and then just cut the caps in quarters. And you remember from before, we like nice high heat. This you can do right at the time of serving. They need only 3 minutes or so to get glazed and golden. And when your fat is hot, let me show you the right moment. Some people, the basics like sautéing get some people confused. See how it's foaming? Okay, now the foaming is subsiding, and that's the time to put in this. And as I said before, let that sit in here for a minute. Nice wide skillet. These will be put on top of each serving, and I'll do one more little thing, and that is gremolata, which is an Italian garnish, and it gives it a nice, perky, lively flavor. We'll start with this little gadget called a zester, which removes lemon or orange zest in nice, long strips. See how nice those look? That would be good on a mousse, or you can do anything with it, really. It's good in that butter that we made. And here's what else goes in the gremolata. We've got lemon and orange rind, some fresh chopped garlic, and some fresh parsley. And I'll put those all together in here. Just stir quickly, and we have that ready for when our stew is ready. Okay, that looks fine. We'll give our mushrooms a quick toss, and you see they're already starting to get golden. Just keep them going a second. I'll put in just another splash of olive oil. Oil and butter together work very nicely here. And then, that's at dinner time. And we then put our stew. I made this one a little earlier. We get that on to reheat, bring it slowly to a simmer. And by the way, if there's any fat on here, when you take it out of the refrigerator, that's the time to lift it off, because when it's cold and congealed, you can pop it right off. And our stew is ready. It's boiling nicely. We'll turn it down so it's just simmering. Make sure that the seasonings are right. Taste it, salt and pepper, and we're ready to serve. Again, all our components are ready. Warmed plate. Here, again, I'm going to do this in the kitchen, but you could do this really either way. This kind of nice pan, this casserole that I've got here, you can bring right to the table and do what I'm doing now at the table. So, we'll start with our stew. Everyone loves this kind of old-fashioned home-cooked dinner. Look at those juices, rich with the wine and veal gravy. We'll then take a little of our mushrooms, just 2 or 3, and you see how cutting them large like that makes a nice impression. A little bit of our sugar snap peas that we've done and just quickly tossed in butter. And I like the bright color for this plate. Come to the table. Give one more mushroom there. Let's not be stingy. Little spritz with the gremolata. And you see how nice a garnish that is. You can pass the remainder separately, which you've heard me say before. And I'm going to serve this with that wonderful crusty polenta gratin, which will catch up all the nice rich juices from the veal. This is the kind of meal that lets you know that food doesn't have to be fancy to be good. You know, I think dessert might just be my favorite part of the whole meal. You can really blast off at the end of things. But do it light. Don't make it an overdose. Keep it a nice light dessert. We're going to make a raspberry mousse that has no eggs in it. Very, very fresh fruit flavor and very simple to do. First thing, I'm using frozen raspberries that I've thawed and drained in the strainer, and I'm holding back that liquid because I'm going to use it. First thing I'm going to use it for is to dissolve some gelatin. And I'm using just enough gelatin for this to hold it together, but you don't want it rubbery. That gets really grotesque. So, first you soften it in this liquid, like so. Sprinkle it on there. Let it go like that for a couple of minutes, and when it's all softened, put it on a low flame, very low, just until it's clear. Stir it once in a while, but don't let it cook. Now, while that's happening, I will puree the raspberries. You can do this in a food processor or a blender. Just go ahead like that. And we're ready. And I'll do this a little bit at a time, like so. Let me show you how that gets done. Okay, just push them through there. The seeds will get left behind. And little by little, you'll have a nice smooth puree coming through. Now, I'm not going to take time to do that now. I have another batch here waiting, and I've got it on an ice bath because this is very important. This is a stage to remember because at this point, our gelatin goes in, and you can also do this in the refrigerator. That's no problem. But what you're looking for, I've got the puree here. Get this out of the way. Put our gelatin in. What you're looking for is a texture that is slightly thickened, a little bit syrupy, but not set. And that's the perfect texture at which time you can whip in some cream. If you let it get too set at this point, you can't whip in the cream. And if it's not set enough, it won't hold it up. So an ice bath does this very, very quickly. I've just got plenty of ice cubes in here, a little cold water, if necessary. I'm going to spike this with some cranberry liqueur. You could also use cognac or whiskey, or if you have it, the Alsatian eau de vie, the brandy called framboise, is delicious in here. Okay. Keep an eye on this. Keep stirring it every once in a while, because if it sets on the bottom, you might not notice it. Okay, meanwhile, I'll finish the whipped cream, and some people have a habit of whipping cream too stiff, and that also will make it hard to fold in. So just whip it until it begins to thicken. Then I'm going to add a little sugar, which will also help hold this together. And raspberries are pretty tart, so you want some sweetness, although you don't want to overdo it at the end of a meal. Something real, real sweet can be too much. Okay, that's just about right. You see what I've got here? It's lazily drooping over here, but it's not really stiff. And this is just beginning to come together. You see this puree is thickening up a little bit. I'll give it just another moment or two. And then I'll show you how to deal with folding that in. First thing, pop in, I don't know what, a quarter of the mixture, something like that, and just fold that together real quickly. You can almost stir it in. And what that'll do is lighten up the mixture. You notice I'm keeping it on the ice. Unless it starts to, if you feel it on the bottom, and you can feel it happening. If it starts to set up too quickly, get it out of there. That's going to be real good. And now, put in the rest of our cream. You can see the kind of light thing I'm going for here. It's tart, it's pale in color. And now it's starting to thicken, so I'll get rid of the ice bath. And just keep folding. And in folding, it's very important. You see I'm going up from underneath and around and over. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm putting lots and lots of air into this. And that's what you want, a real frothy dessert. This is something you could have with a glass of champagne. And this is really a very simple dessert. You could serve this just in a bowl by itself, maybe with a butter cookie. We're going to go for a little more dramatic presentation, but it's a good example of how a very simple thing can wind up looking really good. Okay, don't overdo that. Let's keep ourselves. And I'm going to use this parfait glass, and I've got some nice ripe raspberries, and I'll take them from here very gently and put them in the bottom of our glass. And you can do this, in fact you should do this hours before because you need to give this a little time to set up. And now our mousse goes right in. Just a little hit at the end of the meal. Just keep people going. All right, perfect. And then I'll put that in the refrigerator. And at the end of the meal, I've had a glass of wine. I don't really want to deal with much in the way of dealing with my dessert, so I'll just pull that out of the refrigerator and it's ready to serve. Actually, there may be no better way to end a dinner party than with ripe, fresh fruit. For instance, a big bowl of strawberries is always welcome. Cut up platter of mixed fruits, whatever's in season, is always a nice ending. And when I serve something like this, I like to make what I call cannoli cream, which is actually a lightened version of the filling you get in a well-known Italian pastry. It's made in seconds in a food processor, and you can do it in advance, and that gives it time to set up. First thing you do, whip some ricotta cheese. People will never guess this has ricotta cheese in it. It's very smooth and creamy. A little vanilla, a little bit of orange marmalade, and just to give it a nice little spike, some orange liqueur. You can do that to taste. Whiz it all together. And that's it. Transfer this to a nice cut glass bowl and present it to your guests, and they can spoon it on as much as they like. Or if you have chocolate addicts coming, you can get these little chocolate cups, spoon it into them. You can add some raspberry mousse to some other ones if you want, or any kind of soft filling, and that's a nice little thing to pop in your mouth while you're eating the fruit.